Give the listeners an overview of what these different approaches are and what you all use for your research and why.
Yeah. So the first year I analyzed the data in 2022, we used PLS, right? Partially least squares. Hopefully we can delete that if I'm wrong, but partially least squares, it's a type of structural equation modeling that really, I think, optimizes based on R square. Pretty much they explain it to like how much of the variance in the outcomes you're able to account for with your explanatory variables. This year, or 2023, the report, the analysis behind that was a bit more scoped. Instead of creating a giant structural equation model, we started doing very scoped hypothesis-driven models, smaller. And the reason behind that was simply, if you create these huge models, like in PLS, you just sort of feel as if you're like Zeus or something like that. You can just make all these cool connections, and you're like, oh, wow, look how complicated this model is. It's beautiful. But everything you add into the model affects the relationship that something has to another thing. Dustin Smith, who used to be the researcher on DORA right before me, he explained it kind of as like a solar system, that there's a bunch of planets, and if you add a planet in there, all the gravities change between them. And so if you have this huge model, it's not always obvious to you what's making something change its relationship to another thing. It's just, for a mere mortal like myself, it's really complicated. Like I added security into this model, and all of a sudden this relationship between X and Y is completely different, kind of thing. So we scoped our analysis to be like 10 small models this year, so we could really understand what's going on, and we could think about what's likely to be a confound, and we could think about what the relationships are and these really more nuanced pathways, and not get ourselves confused about spurious relationships that are caused by like another quadrant of the model. And I think when we were mentioning in the report in the methodology section about leave one out cross-validation, there's a ton of different ways. Let's say we have a model, and then we want to add another pathway into the model, or we want to take a pathway out, and we're going to compare two models that are really similar, technically nested one's nested in the other, and we want to say, hey, when I add this pathway, do I get a lift in understanding? Do I have a better understanding of what's going on when I add this one pathway? One way you could do it is R squared. One way you could do it is leave one out cross-validation, AIC, BIC. These are all approaches to just sort of saying, I kind of think of it as the variables in your data, they're like waves, and they're moving. How much of those waves can you account for? And it's sort of saying, if you add this parameter to your model, can you account for more fluctuation or waves in the data? Is it enough to justify it? Because the scientific endeavor, right, is like, it's parsimony, Occam's razor. You don't want to add things that don't need to be added. So that's really the test we're doing. We have a model. What happens if we make it a little more complicated? Oh, we didn't really actually learn anything new. Let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be. And that's the process over and over again.